Welcome to the 76 Capital Leadership Series. My name is Wayne Kimmel, and I'm your host and managing partner of 76 Capital. And today we have a really special guest, one of the CEOs of our portfolio companies, and I cannot wait to get to that. But as you know, our 76 Capital Leadership Series is all about bringing together the leaders in the sports industry, whether it's the entrepreneurs, the executives, the athletes. We bring them on our show. We talk with them about all different areas of what they're doing within the sports industry and their overall careers. It's awesome to do it, and we're just so happy that we've been able to have such great guests over this just the beginning of what we're doing here at our 76 Capital Leadership Series. We've done over 50 of these, and we have at least 50 more to go just this year. We got so much more to do. We're super excited about that, and of course, these shows are all made possible because we've got James Santour back at the station. He's at James Santour. Follow him on Twitter or any of the social media networks. You can follow me at Wayne Kimmel across Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram. And of course, anything that has to do with 76 Capital or the overall sports tech industry, the esports industry, or the sports betting industry, you can follow us at 76 Capital across the same social media networks, and also subscribe to our leadership series on YouTube, or you can also subscribe to any of our podcast channels. We're across all the different podcast networks out there. But let's get right to it. We have a great show today. We have John Fazio, the CEO of Nerd Street Gamers. And John has so many exciting things that he wants to share with us, so many things that I want to talk with him about, how he's become, not only just the CEO of Nerd Street Gamers, but all of the other things that he's done in his career as an entrepreneur, as an investor, as someone who wants to do the right thing and truly make this world a better place. John, welcome to our 76 Capital Leadership Series.
Thank you for having me. It's an honor to be among a pretty epic lineup of guests here.
Well, we've been waiting, to have you on the show, and we're so excited. I guess we have to put a disclaimer out there saying, that we're an investor in Nerd Street Gamers at 76 Capital. It's not really a disclaimer. Actually, I'm so proud of it, and our whole team at 76 Capital is so proud to be, investors and backers of yours from the beginning. And I can't wait to tell that story. But we should probably start off with the really exciting news that just happened with Nerd Street Gamers. Why don't you share with our audience on our leadership series what's happened, the latest thing that's happened?
Sure. We just closed the financing round led by Founders Fund and participated in by all of our existing investors. Founders Fund is a pretty legendary Silicon Valley investment fund that I've looked up to most of my life, and have backed companies like Facebook and Airbnb and Palantir and SpaceX, and the list goes on. And so having them kind of back up behind us is a real validation on kind of the big stage, and wouldn't have been possible without you guys finding us and coming in and funding us in the beginning. But it's really exciting now to be in the the later stages of the startup cycle and really ready to take off for national ubiquity.
Well, congratulations on the funding, and maybe we should just one other thing on the funding. I mean, I think it's really an interesting point of information, is the fact that Brian Singerman, who's one of the lead partners, or is the lead partner, I think, at Founders Fund, is led the deal for you, and his kind of the connection that the two of you had from a gaming perspective.
Yeah, so I actually met Brian. I looked up to him for a long time, and I would listen to some other podcasts and heard some person speaking who really, his name is Joe Lonsdale, and he really had, just kind of triggered, my inspiration and motivation kick, and reached out to him. I kind of have a habit of writing letters to anybody who, inspires me or motivates me, and just wrote him a letter saying, thanks for contributing your ideas, and, I'm a fan. And then a week later wrote another email saying, would you be open to introducing me to Founders Fund, because I knew that they were connected. And I said, I'm nothing if not ambitious. And he said, sure. Introduced me to Brian. From the first call we got on with Brian, it was unlike any pitch that I ever gave. It was very much just a conversation right off the bat. He really understood the industry. He had his own theories about why it hadn't been where it could have been and what it was going to take to get it there, and really just aligned on the vision. And I think it was less than a month and a half later we had the deal closed. So it was a pretty rapid turnaround time there.
Amazing. And yeah, I love the story. You're texting me, and when you're saying, hey, Brian's on TV right now, he's talking about the Airbnb IPO, and you were kind of Next will be Nerd Street Gamers, right? That's what we'll be doing next.
I look forward to that.
Well, look, we do as well, and I think it would be great for our audience to, on our 76 Capital Leadership Series, to share with our audience all of your background, and I think that it'll kind of tells the story as to why you're succeeding right now as the CEO of Nerd Street Gamers. So why don't you take us back to where you grew up, what you were into back then, and I know you were an athlete as well. So tell us the story.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and yeah, a lot of times it does feel like Nerd Street's the culmination of kind of all of my passions and career history here. So exciting to tell you about it and kind of give you the path. So I grew up a privileged individual, suburbs outside Philadelphia. To middle class parents who were incredibly supporting of everything I wanted to do, and kind of blessed me with an understanding of that privilege, and really helped me see the world for what it was, and that my experience was not the experience that everybody else had. And then when it came to sports, I really had my eyes open because I was good at sports, and once you're good at youth sports, you kind of get pushed into travel leagues, and travel leagues become Olympic development programs, and these other bigger things. And I got sent around the country, and then eventually around the world, and got to see people from all sorts of backgrounds that were nothing like mine. Some better off, a lot worse off, and and seeing that kind of diversity at a young age really just built into me. Not only that it wasn't the same experience for us all, but also that sports was just this like equality factor, this like even playing field factor, where it didn't matter how much money your parents had, or even if you had parents, if you were good at the sport, there was these pathways and these opportunities for you. And so that was kind of baked in at a really young age. And on the flip side, I was adept at computers. I took like a logo programming class in like the second grade, and I really just got hooked on it, and I came home and I was excited and told my dad about it, and he came home and brought me a computer home. And if that's not privilege, I don't know what it is. And the next day I'm taking it apart, and he's not mad at me. He encouraged me to learn and figure it out. And I really developed, back then what you would have called like, your PC nerd, kind of persona, and that I was, coding and writing my own applications by the time I was 10 years old. And when I was 13 years old, my father printed out trifold brochures that said, "I'll fix your computer for 75 bucks an hour," and drove me around, neighborhood to neighborhood, targeting the bigger houses, dropping these flyers off. And I was running, full-fledged IT business by the time I was 13, and that turned into a website development business, that turned into a software engineering business. And so all through school, I had this kind of entrepreneurial drive, and I was building companies. And I remember kids in like 10th grade making fun of me, like, "Oh, John has clients," and I had website clients that I couldn't go out on Friday night because I had to get a job done. And so I made really good money doing that. But that affinity for computers drove me to be a gamer, just naturally, because anybody who has a good PC could play the higher end video games. And so I got hooked on PC gaming, and met this group of friends who were hardcore PC gamers. Turns out that they were actually competing in competitive, tournaments for video games. This is like 2002, and they were, driving out to Ohio and driving down to Dallas to play in these tournaments. And there was no upside. There was, just like fun and whatever. But every night they trained and they practiced. I'd go to soccer practice. They went to CS 1-6 practice. They were training, they were coordinating. I got to go to a tournament for the first time actually at a mall, in a LAN center, an internet cafe in a mall. I'm standing there looking at guys sitting around yelling at each other for not sleeping the night before, for not eating right, because they had a tournament, they had to perform. And it was just sports. It was like what I grew up doing with soccer, I was seeing in video games, but they had no upside. There was just nothing that was going to take them to college. There was nothing that was going to give them a career. And so it was, I was probably 16, 17 years old when it was just like light bulb, like there's this business to be built that if we can replicate traditional sports opportunities for video games, more people can play video games than sports. There are more video games than sports. There's so much more diversity and supply for this demand, which at a root, the demand is just for opportunity in life. And so, for video games to come in and fill this huge void was an obvious business opportunity to me. I ended up writing a business plan, calling it Digital Gaming Arena, trying to raise capital for a national network of competitive gaming facilities back in 2006. Failed to raise capital, ended up dropping out of school and starting my own software company. 10 years later, I fund, the first building myself, and then meet you, and we're off to the races.
Well, it's an amazing story. And John, it's so great to have you on our 76 Capital Leadership Series. John Fazio, follow John at JFaz on Twitter. He's a great follow. You'll get some really interesting sort of tidbits of wisdom, from John. And John, you jumped 10 years really fast in your story. And I think one of the things that you did prior to Nerd Street with your software development company in Philadelphia, I think it would be great to share that story, because it was one of the great stories that, as you said to me a number of times, like, a lot of people didn't know and didn't hear about you, but you're just out there, you and your team, just making money and doing your thing, and it's all led to where you are today.
Sure. Yeah. So the software company you're mentioning is Jarvis, and Jarvis is a company that I founded with Chris Alfano, who I had actually met at that internet cafe at that mall in the story I mentioned. I ended up going to work for the internet cafe because I just walked in and said, "Hey, I'm really good with networking and IT. What do you need? Let me work for you. I want to be here." And Chris was the guy who hired me as a network technician. And so I ended up working for Chris for a year, and we're talking, and we ended up building the DGA, Digital Gaming Arena, business plan together. And then when we couldn't raise capital, we were both at Drexel. I was playing soccer there. I had gone on to play there. He was in the engineering group, and we were just like, why don't we just make our own money? And we started Jarvis. And I had experience running the web development company. He had experience freelancing as a kid as well. And so we started Jarvis really with the idea that what was happening, and this is like 2003, 2004, is there was this big transition to cloud. It wasn't really cloud yet. It was called Web 2.0, and we were starting to talk about like being on a website that doesn't refresh and gives you new information, if you remember that. And we were like really ahead of the curve because we had helped out this person who was growing a DJ network in Toronto. The social network ends up blowing up to millions of users. So this is pre-Facebook. This is like the MySpace era. We're managing a social network where we're shipping out servers to Toronto and LA. And I kind of just looked at Chris, and we were doing that as like passion project. I'm like, this is sellable. This is something corporations need. And there's corporations all across the country that are transitioning to this digital world, trying to figure out how to do it. And here we are with the skill set and the experience, having done it on the fly. Let's go sell that. And so him and I started Jarvis and started pitching, everybody from, your local barber to Comcast, and things started off with like, a bartending school and a karate school and a restaurant and a construction company, and then quickly, transitioned to us getting work with the city of Philadelphia and Comcast and Time Warner Cable and Elsevier. We helped Elsevier build their iPad app that transitioned their medical journals from physical journals to, an iPad readable, feature. And so we had a ton of success just by positioning ourselves, at the right place with the right skill set. But what I think, was most valuable, at least to me, was that, I like to kind of say, like, I got to be promiscuous in starting all of these different business initiatives with all of these different companies. So I got to get in, work with a company, figure out exactly how a tech stack worked, figure out how their legal department and accounting department worked with that operations team, and how that operations team was going to either hire or fire, to adapt the team for the new technology. And I got to do that with 30 plus big conglomerate companies, and I got a lot of experience from that. And so while we were, having this success, I think we were 5 or 6 years into the business, I kind of, went back to Chris again and said, hey, we're doing really well. We know, we have an incredible wealth of experience on how to run businesses. Why don't we start our own, kind of investment fund and start investing in new businesses? However, what we wanted to do differently was actually build the companies. We didn't want to just, write checks to other people who were doing things. We saw market problems that we could design the fit for. We wanted to build them and then find the leader to go champion these. We ended up building a variety of different companies, some of which succeeded, some some of which failed. One of which was Entree, which was a food ordering system kind of ahead of the Grubhub era, and really empowering individual restaurants. That exited successfully to Zool, the ghost kitchen software company in New York City, and now we're owners there. We had a t-shirt printing company that failed. We had an education technology company that kind of just became a product of Jarvis as opposed to its own company. And then we had Nerd Street, which was, something that I had invested in as like a LAN party, for fun, where we were just hanging out at the office, throwing these parties where we'd play video games, and then realize like, hey, I can cut a check and build a facility, a modern internet cafe to kind of replicate what I always talked about, which was create this place that can give the opportunities of traditional sports to gamers. And so, I invested out of Jarvis, wrote that first check, and within months, we had seen our events become some of the most popular events in America. And I jumped ship, took over as CEO, met you, and there's the connection to the story.
Well, John, it's incredible, what you've been able to do, and I think what's interesting also is the story behind Nerd Street Gamers and how you came up with the name of the company.
Yeah, so we were on North 3rd Street in Philadelphia, Jarvis was. And so, when we started running our LAN parties, the first one was back in 2011. I was actually just looking at a picture the other day of me and Chris and our designer sitting around designing the logo that somebody found for me. We were out in LA while we were designing this logo, and I said, make it like a pirate flag because we're a bunch of pirates. We're taking new seas. And that was our initial logo, was the Jolly Roger that was a nerd with, nerdy glasses on. And so we called ourselves Nerd Street Gamers just on a whim because we're on Nerd Street. We called it Nerd Street because it looked, N3RD and the computer hacker speak looked like nerd. And so we just called ourselves Nerd Street, and Nerd Street Gamers was just an easy fit. At the time, a few other organizations kind of, found the collective identity with Nerd Street, and it became kind of this little bit of a movement. And then, as that movement developed, Jarvis got to a point where it was pushing, serious initiatives in Philadelphia, from, competency-based learning programs in the school district to open data with the city. And the city actually recognized all of what we had done in contributing to the city by renaming North 3rd Street to Nerd Street to pay homage to, Jarvis and Nerd Street Gamers and some of the other companies that had, grown up and really created this awesome, corridor of innovation on Nerd Street. So if you are in Philadelphia and you walk down the street signs say Nerd Street, not North 3rd Street. And so, when we got to a point where, LAN parties started to become company, we had a question of like, is that what we want to call our company? It was just like for fun. And we said, hell yeah, like that's what this is all about. This is all about, having fun and creating real opportunities. And, it appeals to the gamers, right? Like, it was kind of like taking our word back. Nerd had become this, or started off as this pejorative term that was like, I'm putting you down. And we're like, yeah, we are nerds. We're gonna earn, we're gonna own that. And a big part of the name was kind of taking that back for all the gamers that had been, made fun of for sitting at home playing video games and not going out on a Friday night, who are now, standing on top of international stages next to, global icons. So that was about taking our name back, and the city kind of immortalized it and putting it inside city legislation, and will forever, kind of pay homage to the city of Philadelphia and to Nerd Street for our origins.
Well, certainly one of your partners in crime, I guess, at the time, with the whole Nerd Street thing, was Danny Harvith,
Yep.
Who is now, one of the executives at Nerd Street Gamers. And he was someone who, I've gotten to know personally, when, from the time when he was a student at the University of Maryland, and then working with us at 76 Capital, and now, then with you at Jarvis, and now at Nerd Street. And that he was really the one that connected us. And when you were right at that very early stage where you were going to leave Jarvis to create, to go full time at Nerd Street, it was really exciting. Along with George Miller, our fund invested, in you. And it was this idea that we were going to create just what you were talking about, create this opportunity to allow people to play video games competitively in a physical location, with the top gear, that you can have, the best computers, the best internet connections, right? And And then, we were just going to, build it out, just like, why, as you said, why shouldn't the amateur side of esports and video gaming have what the physical sports has as well? And from there, you just have really taken this and blown it out on a big scale. And I'd love to, share with the audience kind of what happened next. I mean, breaking down the wall was one thing I'll never forget. Maybe share some of those stories.
Yeah, so I think, breaking down the wall, which Wayne is referencing, is the story of, being inside our building at 908 Nerd Street. And half of it was this prototype localhost, this prototype, localhost is what we call our esports training venues. And the other half was still Jarvis. And, it was Jarvis on the full side. We kind of dedicated this space to be, our prototype. And then we got to this place where we were like, packing localhost every night for events, and it was constantly full, and we had Red Bull calling to book the space, and it was clear we needed more space. And so we decided eventually that Jarvis was going to have to leave. We put them in some nice offices downtown, and literally knocked the wall down in between the two spaces. And it was just a weekend, me and my dad sitting in there cutting down the wall, and took care of it. And now opened up, doubled the size of the venue. We were able to create this, video studio on the other side that allowed us to take our broadcast to a whole nother level. From there, we started really getting national attention. So, I think what I always had a vision for was global, right? Where I see this going, is a reality in a future where video games are the center of our culture in a way that sports are now. And they already have become a major piece of culture, but until they reach truly everybody on the spectrum, they're never going to be the core. And I think we're close to that. And, that's really what we wanted to set out to do. But the reality here is that, we need real, meaningful, productive ways to spend our time as humans where our productivity can result in opportunities as output. Sometimes those opportunities are career, sometimes they're educational, sometimes they're social. But if we don't have meaningful ways to productively spend our time with these, opportunities, we're going to have social issues in our culture, because we have this new world of automation where we never had enough jobs for everybody, and now we have less jobs for everybody as every day goes by. And so as a society, we have to figure out what we're going to do with the people who can't have jobs, and what we need to look for are opportunity pathways, whether it's education, or the type of career training that creates all new job categories. And video games, as a recreation, is an amazing and productive way to spend your time socializing with people, developing hand-eye coordination, developing critical thinking. But when you compare that on an competitive basis to what esports does, taking video games to the next level, now you have pathways. You're creating upwards opportunities, just like sports, where that kid who's really good at a video game is going to get a college opportunity that she would never have had without that video game. And so for me, the big picture was always, this is a global problem, that technology access is not high enough. I think we're still like 45% of the world doesn't have internet at home. And so the market is all of the gamers who play and have not yet competed on behalf of their high school or their college, but a B is all the people who can't yet connect and are waiting to be connected. And so for us, it was about proving that we could do a business model that would scale to the people who needed access. Internet cafes like the one I worked at in high school that charge $5 an hour are not accessible to somebody who lives in a low income area. And so what we did when we invested prior to your investment was build a model that replicated traditional sports facilities. So instead of paying by the hour, you paid to enter an event, a tournament that might run all weekend, that might run all night, and it gave you a way to spend your time productively at an affordable cost, where I, instead of charging by the hour per PC, could run dozens of people through each PC by the hour, and my economics 6 or 7x. And so an internet cafe that made family style business 150 grand a year ramped up to 600-700 grand a year, and the $250,000 land center became a multi-million-dollar land center. That proof point, those unit economics, are obviously why you invested, and what really attracted the next step, because once we were able to take those physical facilities and leverage what we were getting from them, which wasn't just, access, which is also the infrastructure of the people there, then we were able to scale fast. And what I mean by that is, I think the video game industry, for 25 years, we've talked about when competitive video games are going to be the next big thing. And we've been held back by this myth that because video games are software, we could scale them with software. But they're not. They're competition, and that requires people. It requires coaches, managers, facility managers, referees, you name it. And so when we had our store open, what we realized was our store staff could also produce those events, could also referee those events, just like I grew up working at a soccer facility where I was the referee, I was a coach, I was a janitor, I did it all, and worked at the facility there. And when we were able to really take advantage of that, what that meant was the programming started to scale. So now, with 6 locations across the country, we're able to run camps where the participants have a really good counselor ratio, and they're actually being coached by an individual person, not just, watching a Coursera class or something. And so, the scale of human capital, which comes from our physical buildings, allows us to turn on programming that can be digital as well. And COVID was the perfect example there. We had to shut all of our facilities down, but we didn't lay anybody off because we just took all the store staff and had them run digital programming that reached more people, and that's where we got all of our monetization from. So the real piece to fix, besides the access point, which is obvious, is scaling human capital like we have for traditional sports. Traditional sports grew organically over 200 years, one gym by another. There's no gym company that owns all the gyms. There's no, there's federations, there's organizations and collections, but nobody really got out there ahead of time to win. And that's what we want to do in esports.
Well, it's really great to have you, John, on our 76 Capital Leadership Series. We have John Fazio, the CEO of Nerd Street Gamers, and John, you're able to attract not only my partners John and Chad and myself at 76 Capital as investors, but we talked about George Miller. You've brought in Shane Fleury and his team are involved with you guys. You have Five Below and Comcast Spectacor, which is led by Tucker Roberts. And what they've meant to you. I mean, I think it would be really interesting to talk about how you brought in these kinds of partners, what a Comcast Spectacor has meant to the business, as well as what you're now looking to do with Joel Anderson and his team over at Five Below.
Yeah, so for me, when I had first met you, I had been in a mentality of shunning venture capital. I was like, we bootstrapped our company. I had a lot of misconceptions about venture capital, but I had gotten to this point where I started to realize what I do need is capital. Like, this is a business, and the only way I'm going to grow it the way that it deserves to be grown is with capital. And so when I met you guys was the first time that I had started to open up my mind to, like, maybe we need capital. But what was so appealing about you guys was this kind of trifecta, of you and John and Ryan, where I was able to really take advantage of these different, media and sports, retail, and then with George Miller, local regionalized media and his understanding of that scene. And so the expertise that came from that was really appealing to me, in that, like, hey, I'm not just getting a check here. I'm getting people who've also built, stuff that I'm trying to build here. And that was really helpful. And, you and John and George have been incredible resources since then. When it came down to Comcast, it was actually that I think they actually reached out to us before you. I think we had talked to them long before, and we just had this kind of open, rolling conversation. And at the time, it was NBC Sports, and NBC Sports Ventures, which doesn't exist anymore, was this venture arm of NBC Sports. They were looking at us alongside Comcast Ventures, and it was this ongoing conversation about, like, these venture companies invest in tech and software platforms, and we're this, like, messy brick and mortar real thing, and it was very different. And so as that conversation was going on, you guys jump in, you invest, you're opportunistic and move fast. The conversation continued with Comcast, and what became increasingly appealing to me was all of my experience consulting for corporations meant I had a really good understanding of how these businesses worked, where their priorities were, et cetera. And I started to feel like, hey, we can take advantage of this. We can get advantage. Comcast is a major company with NBC, with Universal, with their Comcast properties, and this is something we can leverage. And so I really became interested and started pushing on, like, let's find a deal here. And in the middle of me pushing, in the NBC Sports Ventures team really starting to pick up and get more interested, along comes Tucker, and Tucker had just bought this, Overwatch franchise. I think you've got a really, good story about running into him on the beach, somewhere in the islands. But I, just ran into him because basically when NBC Sports Ventures was talking to somebody at Comcast Ventures, Tucker overheard and was like, "Hey, I'm investing in esports," and they said, "Why don't you come help us do diligence on this?" So Tucker then starts sitting in on the diligence and goes, "I want this for myself," and eventually kind of usurps the deal, packages it up for Comcast Spectacor, which at the time owned the Philadelphia Overwatch team, the Philadelphia Flyers, and Wells Fargo Center. And it made a ton of sense. Tucker had a vision. He understood esports. He came from the industry. And him and I met with Joe Marsh, who was at the time a VP of Finance, and went on to become our board member after the investment, at an LA restaurant. I think I showed up in a suit expecting two Comcast guys to show up in a suit, and they come in like hoodies and like casual clothes, and I felt like a real goober. But it was a great meeting. We had a great dinner, and by the time we left, we had a deal. Didn't close so fast. I think it took another 4 months to close. A good story. We actually ended up closing on my wedding day while I was in Italy being married. I was, hiding from my wife to not let her know I was working, and I'm sitting there texting, and I got the signature pages are released, wires are done at like 10 a.m. Italy time, and got married at like noon, and so it was a really exciting big moment for me, and ended up getting that deal done. And then after that, I think about a year went by, and we met a guy named David McEwen, who was the VP of marketing at the time, at Five Below, who we got connected to because of Rob Arrett, who was a lawyer at Comcast Spectacor, who had done our deal, had recently gone out on his own or joined another firm, and was consulting with Five Below. Connected the dots that Five Below, they had been running for fun, just to figure it out, what's going on with this gaming scene, and to step back a second, Five Below is a discount retailer that sells, your old school kind of dollar store items, but in a more upscale environment. The goal is to, bring affordable access consumer products to a user group that makes them feel like you're in a normal store and not just like walking through a warehouse with bins out like most dollar stores feel like. And so they had just plugged in a PlayStation and started running video game and telling people they could play video games. And what they noticed was that there's 30, 40 kids lining up, huddling up in their stores, and suddenly they're doing more sales because of this, video game console they hooked up. And so they had this interest in, like, can we use our space to do something? And they had been very opportunistic when they took their leases. Almost 50% of the space they took, they didn't need, they just took for future usages. And what that meant was that they were looking to, take 3,000 square feet per store, and figure out some sort of gaming usage. So I met with David, series of meetings later, it was clear that there was alignment. I was kind of, I'd say, off put at first, like, how are we going to partner with a dollar store, right? I like didn't understand it. But then I got to meet Joel Anderson, and when I met Joel, he really talked to me about this mission, and this kind of, objective to bring affordable consumer access in a higher end environment. And, it was all about access, and to me, that's what we were always doing. It was always about access. And so, with such aligned missions, it made a lot of sense. And honestly, they made us a deal that we couldn't refuse. It was 75 locations that we can build cost free in their stores, then share revenue because they get the upside of the foot traffic, and whatever revenue we generate, we get immediate scale. We're off to the races, and they invest the capital in us. And so just an incredible partner to come on board. And so far, every single round that we've had, all of our existing investors have participated, and that's just been again a validation of how much faith our investment team has in us. But with Five Below, we signed that deal. That was a pretty quick turnaround, only 3 or 4 months, and we were signed. Off to the races. Now we've got Five Below local hosts open in Philadelphia, Austin, Texas, soon to be Houston, Texas, soon to be North Carolina, soon to be San Diego, soon to be Bakersfield, California. So, we're moving really fast thanks to that partnership, and it's been incredible. And then, year of the pandemic hits, and we have to shut down all of our stores. And, like I said, we transitioned to digital programming and had so much success and attention that we were actually able to produce positive revenue growth despite all of our stores being closed. Really unsuccessful at trying to raise capital for a whole year. Suddenly we meet Brian. He sees the story and what we're able to do. I think so many people had been timid about, like, how do I invest in live events in the middle of a pandemic? Brian saw right through that and made the deal and said, we want to see you succeed and get through the pandemic, and then do, the bigger check here that lets you, kind of go finish, your expansion to ubiquity, which is, where we're at now. And we're 6 venues. We'll be at 20 by the end of the year.
Well, it's such an exciting story and such a great growth story. And as you know, John, maybe share with everybody what it is like. Maybe you could describe what it's like walking through the Five Below store, which, as you said, it's a high-end experience, right? I mean, with really cool, fun products all over the place, from drinks to, t-shirts and, sort of fun stuff. But then I kind of call it like that moment where it's like you get that moment. Like all of a sudden you get to those glass doors and then they open, and then you're into the local host. What do you see in there? What is it like?
Yeah, so I think it's important to note that that's not the only way in. We do the local stores have a front door and have their own external entrance, and so a lot of the consumers are coming straight for local hosts. However, if you're in Five Below and you notice there's this, we call it the portal, this portal over there, and you walk through, you're going from a retail environment where you're buying, Star Wars stocks and candy and food and, grocery, into, a high-end $3,000 computer, $500 chair, $120 headset, gaming experience with a stage and bright lights. And it's a really incredible experience for the kid who's with their parents shopping, and for that to be their first introduction to this world that, like, hey, that Fortnite game I play at home all day every day, all night, there's a world of competition that rivals, football and basketball, that rivals, this pathway to college. And so I think, part of what we do in designing these venues is make them feel open, spacious, smell nice, look nice, have a very athletic feel to it, to validate for these parents that this is, a real valid usage of your time that can actually result in, in a cool outcome. And so we designed that very intentfully to kind of be that, like, wow, what's that? Let me go see it. And now I open up, and this is a whole new world. I think Five Below's team actually calls it their seventh world. I don't want to be incorrect in naming the first six, but that's kind of what it is.
Well, it's certainly an incredible experience, and I hope that everyone will get a chance very soon to be able to go into all the stores that you have all across the country. It is amazing, and on top of all of that, I mean, you've really been able to create a great team at Nerd Street Gamers. I mean, everyone from Tiana to Paige to Tom to Pete to Todd. I mean, I'm sure I'm leaving a lot of people out, but like, it's really been great to see the kinds of people that you've been able to bring together, and the kind of people that they are, and the fact that they're all really nice, kind, smart people who have a very similar vision to you. You must be really proud of the team that you've been able to put together so far.
Yeah, absolutely. And I say all the time, I stand on their shoulders every time I collect an accolade, on behalf of the business. And, I really owe it to the team, to all the success we've had so far. It wouldn't be possible without them. My ethos for building a company and building a team has always been, why do it the way that it's always been done? We're starting a new company. We're backed by people who believe in us, world-class investors. Let's do this the right way, and everything from, social awakenings in racial injustice being talked about in the corporate workplace, to, the evolution of language and how we use gender and language, and the words we use in gaming and how they, have originated. These are things that most corporations shy away from talking about, and we like to, hit head on. And we've really curated a culture where everybody on our team is focused on, what's best for the employees, and they know that speaking up doesn't cost them their job. And to do that, you have to, find the right people. I think one of the things you and I really, kind of aligned on the most is when you said you wanted to invest in smart, nice people. And, that's my hiring ethos, is I want smart, nice people, and if you're good at your job, that's not enough if you're an asshole to everybody on your team, and now everybody on your team doesn't want to work with you. And so as you grow a company this fast, there's obviously issues, and we haven't been perfect, and we've had to adjust along the way. But we've really tried to bring on a team that's experienced, that knows what we're doing, and believes in the mission. And at the end of the day, what we're doing here is creating a better environment for future generations. I've got an 11-month-old daughter now, and I want her to grow up in an environment where there's more opportunity, and that's what we're doing. And I think everybody we hire aligns with that and understands that. And my VP of marketing is from the MLB. My COO is from a public company that ran a retail business. Half my team's from the NBA, the NHL. We've really tried to hire from sporting organizations that have seen what successful opportunity pathways look like. And then the other half of the team is from the video game industry, hardcore video gamers themselves, or worked at esports companies or publishers, or other past video game companies. And bridging that culture is probably the hardest, culture element, and also the most important, where, there's this authenticity, where you don't want somebody making business decisions who's not an actual, understanding, doesn't have an actual understanding of what they're making decisions on. In the beginning of this, we talked about how I felt like Nerd Street was kind of like the culmination of all things for me, because it brings together sports, video games, and technology, the three passions of my life and pillars of my life. And I think that's my competitive advantage, is that I understand how to grow and run a business, but I'm also playing video games tonight, and I'm also, participant, and I'm a customer, of our own business. And so having that understanding has allowed me to bridge the gap personally, and it's, really been driven from the top, where there's a respect. If you're the adult who came from a public company versus the 23-year-old who is running our events and content for us, and came from the video game industry, there's a lot of teaching and shared education and empathy, and you couldn't have that if you don't hire good, nice people.
Well, John, I mean, it's been impressive to watch the growth so far, and I think one of the things that I'd love to hear as well from you is, just in your career and in life in general. I mean, have you had um, any specific mentors or people that you've looked up to that have really affected the way that you run your business today, now as a father, as a husband? Is there someone that kind of really stands out for you?
Yeah, my father. No, absolutely, without a doubt. He gave me, a privileged upbringing, showed me how to behave with empathy. I think like I said, he pushed me to always be better. He was the reason I started my first business. He's the reason that, he's the one who drove me to soccer practices 2 hours away. He's the one who drove me to North Carolina for a showcase. He's the one who brought me home a computer when he barely even could afford his own computer. I think he gave all the privileges a father could give, and then he really motivated me to do hard work. And he was the kind of dad who, I do this job for my family, and it's not about passion, it's about providing food. But then when I was 15, 16, it was almost like him his motivation to help me grow and to push me to grow as an entrepreneur inspired him to be an entrepreneur in a way. And he started his own business at age like 48 or something. Starts his own property business, which his passion was always construction. He loved building. It was his favorite thing in the world. And so he started building his own houses and started renovating his own houses. And unfortunately, when I was 32 years ago, he passed away really, out of nowhere, and kind of lost my best friend and my mentor. But what he left behind, in addition, to a fully functioning, business that he created and now supports my mother, was a legacy with me that really taught me the value of hard work and sacrifice. But at the same time, he had that kind of inspiration, to not just just take the job, to make your passion. And I think seeing him do that later in life in a lot of ways was even more impactful for me, because I got to see the delta. I got to see how much more happy he was working for himself than working for a boss he didn't like. And so that really drove me in a lot of ways. And then, in terms of inspiration, I think my grandfather was always, he was an entrepreneur, started a million companies. I think most of them failed. So I wouldn't say he was the best mentor, but he was always an inspiration, because he was the guy who could stop everything on Tuesday at 2 o'clock and come pick me up from school to go to McDonald's or whatever. And he had that freedom because he was an entrepreneur. And so I would look at my dad grinding out and commuting to the city versus that. And so where my dad mentored me and gave me the hard work ethic, my grandpa gave me the desire for freedom that comes with entrepreneurship. And there's a curse to that, because anybody who succeeds in entrepreneurship knows that's not real freedom. It's just maybe flexibility.
that's that's a really great point, John, and it's really awesome having John Fazio on our 76 Capital Leadership Series. And I'll tell you, it's not a straight line to the top in this world of entrepreneurship, as you mentioned earlier. I mean, look, we were on your way at Nerd Street to just build out all these physical locations, and of course, this terrible pandemic hit, and you were able to really make some incredible moves and changes, and even grow the business during that time, and bring some great partners on and investors, and that's amazing. And so one of the things I would love to just hear about is this past summer. I'll never forget, getting calls and text messages when people are saying, "Wait, I think that Nerd Street thing that you guys are involved with they're doing something on ESPN right now, and I think that's Snoop, and what's going on here?" That must have been incredible when you did that.
Yeah, that was really validating, to get somebody like ESPN wanting to buy your content. And that one you're talking about is a celebrity Madden competition we did, and we had Snoop Dogg on the show, and really awesome experience, cool content. Love seeing your logo out on ESPN, right? Like that's one of the coolest things in the world for me. But I'd say the most rewarding was the Emmy that we won with our TV show. So we create this TV show called For the Win Philadelphia that goes out on NBC Sports Philadelphia, and the the purpose of the show is to validate esports, and kind of show the normalcy behind it, and kind of open it up to parents to say, like, look, kids are getting into college, look at what this happens. And so it reports on esports from a local point of view. And our Emmy won because it was a father connecting with his son through video games, where he was really struggling to find any connection, and now they had this really meaningful friendship. And so it was really awesome to be honored with the Emmy for that. But at the same time, just so meaningful. Like, I got into this industry because I played video games when I think it was NHL 93 with my father when I was like 5 years old on a Sega Genesis, right? And so that kind of connection to my father from video games was something I really appreciated, and was really glad to see it got recognized. But yeah, seeing your content on NBC Sports, on ESPN, it's mind blowing sometimes. It was mind blowing enough, having conversations with Ryan Howard and Emmanuel Sanders on my cell phone, right? And that was bizarre. Talking to World Series champs and Super Bowl champions, on the phone. But then seeing your brand up on TV, yeah, it's humbling in a way, because it's just so, like, you got to remember where you came from, and looking at it, just going like, I'm so privileged to have this opportunity.
Well, John, as we start to wrap up here, I can't let what you just mentioned go. I mean, I'd love for you to share a little bit about your relationship with Emmanuel Sanders and how that all started. He was at the time, wide receiver with the San Francisco 49ers, or actually started with the Denver Broncos.
Yeah.
When he was with the Broncos. So tell that story, how that all came together.
Yeah, so we were opening our Denver facility, and at the time, you have the relationship with Rubicon, who does their digital media management for a bunch of celebrity athletes like Emmanuel Sanders, and we were looking for somebody to be an endorser. Emmanuel at the time, Denver was his place, and had just won a Super Bowl with them, and it was the perfect person to kind of connect with us. And then we found out that he's a hardcore video gamer, and so he came out and played video games with me for a day out in Denver. We talked, and we found a deal that we could strike where he would really just help promote what we were doing in Denver. And then unfortunately he got hurt, and then he got traded to the 49ers and then to the Saints. And at that point, we were in a place where, like, all right, we can't have him really promote Denver. And so we started to, really work with him on wider activations, leveraging, the fact that he's a gamer, but talking about, his experience and his path to pro and all the opportunities that got him there, and how gaming is now going to give that, to more people. It's been an incredible partnership. Watching him wear our cleats, live on field with our logo was, really cool. I got to go. He actually played in the ESPN Celebrity Athlete Tournament, Apex, representing Nerd Street, and so it's been a really fun and cool partnership. And Manuel's just a really good person, and really really understands the implicit value of what we're doing, and I think he's really eager to help see that reach more people.
Well, it's been really interesting to see just sort of how many professional physical athletes are also so interested in the world of esports, and having a guy like Emmanuel Sanders, who is not only just interested in it, but he's actually really good at gaming.
Yeah.
Is pretty great to have as part of the overall team. It's that Nerd Street Gamers.
Couldn't agree more.
Well, John, as we start to really wrap up here, I really want to hear a couple things from you, really about kind of the future of not only Nerd Street, but just over the overall industry of esports. Where do you see it going? The big publishers, out there that are making the games, that are kind of in the core, kind of in the middle of everything that's happening out there. And what do you kind of see what will happen over the next 3-4 years in the overall esports industry?
Sure. I mean, 2 years ago, 3,000 high schools signed up with 15 or more participants for varsity esports for the first time ever. The year after it was 6,000. This year it was 12,000. Next year we're projected to be over 25,000. Now, there's two stories to that. One, that's ridiculous growth. And that means that in 2 years, or actually a year from now, 3,000 students, and in 2 years, 6,000 students will have finished their high school career with a varsity esports team they could have played for, rooted for, or at least knew about. And that creates real fans. And that exponential growth is happening no matter what we or anybody else does, right? And that right there is a capturable market that, they're going to spend money as fans, customers, participants. That growth is baked in. But the other piece of that is that none of those students could participate without their own equipment. And so all of those students have to have their own equipment at home, which we know, especially from the pandemic and the remote learning hurdles that we've learned about, there's a major chunk of our American students who don't have access to the type of, first off, internet, but the type of equipment they would need to participate in esports. So over the next few years, we're going to see ridiculous, Spitfire growth of the market at the top end, because of that high school engine that's turning on and just pumping out fans. But it's going to be a privileged group of individuals at first. And what we're doing, and our growth plans, and we're at 6 venues now. We want to be at 20 by the end of the year, 25 the year after, and continue expanding our rapid pace of growth here. We'd like to have hundreds of venues in the country, and we believe that building those venues is going to be the reason that more market participants enter, because they'll have access to the technology they need to enter. So I think that's where the market growth is going and what it's going to look like. I think, in the investment side, I've been talking for a long time about liquidity and what happens when you print as much capital as we've printed, in the markets. And I think we're seeing the results talked about a lot more now than we were a year ago. And you're just seeing that there's a lot of capital flowing, and it's going to look for exciting, industries like ours. A lot of the capital into this industry at first flew to the professional teams at the top end, and now we'll start to see the investments in infrastructural companies that actually provide the bread and butter, the creation of next generation fans. And then long term, where we're going, I think esports is it. It's going to be, like if you've seen Ready Player One, the largest competition in the world will be esports. Do I think traditional sports goes anywhere? No. Do I think it dies? No. But reality is you need a physical set of capabilities to participate in sports that you don't need for esports. And so therefore esports is more accessible. And so I think we're in a path where not only will it be the largest entertainment vertical, but it's going to become the largest pathway in the world for people to opportunity, which is currently reserved for sports.
Well, and John, I think that is so well said. And I think one thing I would also love for you to comment on is the collegiate scene. I think it shocks so many people even to this day that you can get a scholarship to go to college to play, esport, to play a video game or one of the esports. And and with colleges like Harrisburg University and being led by Eric Darr and what he's doing over there. I mean, he's certainly not the only one, but what he's been able to do to build that university within the world of esports has been incredible. What do you see what's going to happen from a collegiate perspective?
Yeah, I mean, college is providing an incredible opportunity for the universities themselves. I mean, Eric Darr came to me 2 years ago and said, I want to be the Notre Dame of esports. And I was like, Harrisburg University? Like, I don't know anything about you guys, never even heard of you. Whatever you say. And if you got money, we'll help you out, we'll support you. 6 months later, it's come to fruition. And every single League of Legends player in China and South Korea know who Harrisburg University is. What other universities can say that, right? And that is the power of the reach that you can get from esports. And so their investment into that was, keen and incredibly successful. And I think Eric is a visionary for that, and will continue to have a lot of success there. College is at a macro level. I think what I just said about high schools and the growth is what's going to feed that college growth. Colleges are right now in a place where yes, there's scholarships, but those are coming from grants, they're coming from clubs, they're not accepted at a varsity level yet. But when suddenly 10, 15,000 high schools have varsity programs that are graduating kids going, where can I play varsity at college? That's going to change. The NCAA is really scared of this for two reasons. One was monetization. Obviously, they're changing their minds on that now that we're seeing monetization, shift on traditional sports. So hopefully that goes, better. But two is violence, and I think there's a little bit of hypocrisy there when we're smashing our heads against each other at 15 miles an hour on a football field and we're worried about violence in a video game. However, there is some truth to that, and that we have to be careful about the types of titles we pick, and we don't want to promote gun violence and shooters like so many of the video games are surrounded by. But I think it's about narrative, just like we with football constantly strive to be safer, and we're constantly innovating and constantly changing the rules so that we can be better. You got to do that with esports too. And the gun thing is cultural. You go to North Dakota, and we talk to schools there about they have shooting club, after school shooting clubs where they have guns on school grounds. You talk to school district in Philadelphia, no guns can even be talked about in school, so it's like very different culturally, and we haven't seen that gap get bridged yet. I'm hopeful that it's the NCAA that steps up and supports it. The NCAA created opportunities for me and so many other athletes that I think it would be a shame if they're not the people to step in and really bring this to gaming. But if they don't, somebody will, because there's just way too much capital flowing. And the second that a school is making as much money on sponsorships because of their League of Legends team as they are their football team, everybody's going to fall in line.
It's there's so much more we can discuss. I mean, and it's whether it's the Overwatch League or the Call of Duty League or all the different leagues that are out there today that weren't here a few years ago. The fact of the matter of what you guys have done with Valorant, I think, has been unbelievable. I mean, maybe just touch on that and how you as and Nursery has sort of jumped in and supported that game, at such an early stage, and where that's going, or any other game that you think are sort of where things will go moving forward.
Yeah, I don't like to predict the games because who knows? Nobody could have predicted Fortnite came up overnight like it did. Nobody could have predicted, some of these games that come out. But then something like Valorant, everybody predicted it because, Riot, the most successful, esports game, League of Legends, says they're going to launch, a shooter game. And so we were all ready and waiting. And so us having had success in so many other communities, we saw it coming and we were opportunistic about it and we jumped in and invested. But I think the most important part of the story here is that I think for the first time, we've been able to bring platform economics to the publisher. And so typically when, we're running all these publisher events, typically that costs the publishers millions of dollars, from service providers to produce them. We're able to produce them at no cost because those users are signing up for our platform. For instance, our Valorant tournaments, we did that for Riot last year. We ran them with T1, with FaZe Clan, with major top level organizations, and Riot and the backing there. Through the end of Q3 last year, that had added 1,100 users to our platform, spending an average of $70 a year. That's real money that we're making from this, and we're taking that platform economic model and providing the benefit back to the consumer, back to the publisher, by getting cheaper events, by getting cheaper services for the publishers. And this was the first time we really got to take our model and apply it, and the success has been evident. Our Twitch channel ended 2019 with 9,000 something or 15,000 followers. We ended 2020 with 94,000, and now we're at 200,000 in the first 2 months of the year. We had 2,000% growth of our Twitch viewership in 2020, and so far in January and February, we've done more than the entire year combined. And that growth comes from supporting these publishers in a way that historically cost them a ton of money. And so we're really flipping the economic model for the publishers, which I think in the end benefits the consumers. And so the demonstration of that, I think, is going to be important for other publishers to go, oh, look, there's models where we don't have to be making all top down, gargantuan investment just to support this ecosystem. There's going to be other people with monetizable upside like Nerd Street that can support it.
Well, it's been a tremendous conversation, hearing all the things that you've been able to share with us, John. Thank you so much for joining our 76 Capital Leadership Series.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Well, listen, you learned a lot today. I mean, we had John Fazio, the CEO of Nerd Street Gamers, on our 76 Capital Leadership Series. Not only is he an entrepreneur, CEO, and just a really, really good person, you got to hear, a lot of sort of the ins and outs of the overall esports industry and where this is going. So again, thanks to John Fazio for joining us today, and hope that everyone has a great day.